Right now, though, we get to talk a little high school football with our good friend Stephen Orr, West Texas Friday Night Scoreboard Show. Get a little bit of a preview of what fans will see tonight during, week 2 of high school football. Stephen Orr, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Chad, how are you this morning?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing very well. Just getting ready for another exciting week. Getting the season kicked off last week and had some really good games, some awesome stuff last week, and I have some really good games this week as well.
Well, what are some of the games that we're taking a look at this week?
Well, when we get right there around Lubbock, you've got several good games. Let's start last night with Lubbock hosting Andrews, and Lubbock High falls to Andrews 28-16. But the story of the game really, too, is missed opportunities by Lubbock where they had opportunities to score, and that game was very winnable. And I think, if you don't necessarily like moral victories, but for Lubbock High, trying to right that ship a little bit, that's a good performance by a pretty good team, and they were in it and actually could have won the game. That's a good way to maybe some moving in the right direction. Now they just need to figure out how to come out on the right side on the scoreboard and maybe put together a pretty decent season. So we had that last night, and then you go tonight. You've got games Lubbock Monterey hosting Abilene Wiley. Monterey started their season great last week with a 41-13 win over Odessa High. Abilene Wiley, of course, is a name that you'll hear us talking about every year come the end of the season, as far as a team that we're always seeing in the playoffs. And they had a really close game against Vernon. They won that game 15-9. So Monterey has an opportunity here really to build some early season momentum. And I think a win over Abilene Wiley, even though Wiley's a smaller classification, that's a really good ball club that's beat a lot of really good teams in the past. And I think that could go a long way towards Monterey getting a little momentum. A game that I'm really excited to see how it turns out is Lubbock Cooper taking on Randall High School up out of the Amarillo Canyon area. They've only played one time before, and Randall won that game 35-28. That was back in 2014. Cooper's game last week called because of lightning. They were leading Amarillo High School 7-0 at the time that game was called. And that for the second year in a row now, Lubbock Cooper's lost a game due to weather. And this is Randall's season opener. They started out the season with the open date, so this is their first ball game. And you've got to think that kind of tips the scales in the favor of the Pirates a little bit, simply because they've had that game prep, that they've been on the field even though they didn't finish the game, where Randall's still going to be working out those first game kinks. So that could be an interesting game, and both of those are teams that I think that we'll see in the playoffs come the end of the year. Lubbock Coronado travels down to take on Wichita Falls Rider, and Coronado had a really solid win over Plainview last week. We're able to hold Plainview off when Plainview was trying to come back late. Wichita Falls Rider is a team that is a perennial playoff team, but they didn't start their season off very well as they lost to Mansfield Legacy 50-17 last week. So their confidence could be a little bit shaken, and Coach Parr's team really could pick up some momentum if they can get a road win down there against a team that with a name like Wichita Falls Rider. That could be a really solid win, and I think Coronado has a chance to pull that off. Lubbock Estacada travels up to Dumas to take on the Dumas Demons. Estacada got a season win over Hereford last week, 27-20 to start their season. Dumas beat Perryton team 36-32. So this is a game that could be really good. Don't know what to expect of Dumas. Last week they were kind of Jekyll and Hyde all inside a game. They did end up pulling out the win, but it really was a tale of two teams as they were really error-prone at times, and then they played really solid as well. Plainview High School is hosting Amarillo Tascosa. Of course, we just mentioned that Plainview lost to Coronado last week. Tascosa beat Amarillo Paladura 44-14, and I think the Bulldogs are going to have to do a whole lot better job of getting that running game established early and really dominate the line of scrimmage if they're going to have a chance to beat the higher classification Amarillo Tascosa. Drop down into some smaller classifications. You got Lamesa taking on New Deal. Lamesa lost a tough one last week to Dimmitt 51-16. New Deal beat Lubbock Roosevelt 14-0, but I was a little bit surprised by that simply because New Deal doesn't usually have that much difficult a time scoring points. So either Roosevelt really stepped up on the defense, or New Deal maybe struggled a little bit in that first season. So we'll see how they rebound against Lamesa tonight. Seminole hosting Idalou. Idalou travels down to the Wigwam, and they've got to be riding high after they come off that 17-14 win over Shallow Water last week. Seminole did defeat Lubbock High last week, 44-9. So Seminole showed the ability to put some points on the board, but they're going to face a much stiffer defense in Idalou than what they did last week, and so I think the Wildcats have a pretty good chance there. Brownfield last week, I really have high hopes for Brownfield. I think they're going to be a really good football team. They go take on a Clyde Bulldogs team last week, and they score points. They got 32 points, but they gave up 48 to Clyde and lost their season opener. And now they go right from that into another really tough team in Midland, Greenwood. Greenwood defeated Snyder last week 34-20, and Snyder is certainly no slouch this year. So that's going to be a really good ball game played over at Brownfield. And I know Coach Welps wants to even that ledger on the win-loss record, and they can do it against a really good Midland Greenwood team. Probably one of the games that I'm most excited to see, and this would be one that I'd go out and watch, is Levelland coming to Shallow Water to take on the Mustangs. We talked about Shallow Water and that tough loss to Idalou. Well, Levelland goes, and they put a whooping on Muleshoe, 56-31, and Nick Gerber, 322 yards passing, 6 touchdowns in that ball game. And so they can put points on the board, and I've said for the last couple of years, I think Levelland has really underperformed based on the talent they have on the field, and they could really establish some momentum if they could go 2-0, and after beating Muleshoe and then Shallow Water, that's 2 big-name programs that we talk about in the playoffs all the time. That could really set the tone for that team. But here's a little thing. Shallow Water has not started a season 0-2 since back in 2007, and they finished that campaign 2-8 on the year. So something's got to give there. And
big game for Shallow Water.
It's a big game for Shallow Water, and 2 really tough teams for them to open their season with. And I think that can really go a long way for both of those teams as far as establishing that early momentum and maybe have an impact on how the season plays out. Lubbock Roosevelt gets Slayton this week. Slayton lost to Floydada last week, 27-0. And Roosevelt, again, losing to New Deal. Both of these teams still looking to put their first points on the board in a ball game for the year. So I think Roosevelt probably has a little bit of an advantage there, but we'll see. Another really interesting game to me is Post taking on Tahoka. Post beat Abernathy 21-0 last week, and probably my surprise game of the South Plains last week was Tahoka not only beating Crosby, they took them to the woodshed 55-18.
Wow. And
Tahoka was kind of under the radar, but we need to pay attention to them because I think when the results of the game tonight with Post will tell us if Tahoka's for real or not. So that's a really interesting game to watch. Abernathy has Tulia. That's 2 teams that lost. Abernathy getting shut out, which is very uncommon for them against Post last week, and Tulia lost to Panhandle up at Dick Bivens Stadium in Amarillo 47-2. So that's 2 teams that really want to turn around and have a different direction. I think Abernathy probably the better chance to have that come out tonight. Floydada hosts Seagraves, and Seagraves, after losing Gary Kyle last year, one of the top running backs in the state as far as yardage, but they didn't miss a beat last week against Stanton. Floydada beat Slayton 27-0. Abraham Perez for Floydada over 150 yards rushing, throws a couple of touchdowns and scores another one on the ground. So that could be a really interesting game. We'll see whose defense is stronger there. Health Center and Dimmitt, 2 teams that came off big wins last week, and that could be a pretty interesting game. And then you've got Olton and Rawls, 2 teams that are looking to rebound from big losses. 6-man football, you got Valley taking on Follett. That's 2 teams that are currently in the playoffs. Valley had a big win over Ropes last week. Follett got a big win as well. Then we got Cotton Center taking on Wellman Union. Wellman Union could be a surprise. They've got a really young team, but I think if they can get some early momentum, I think we'll see them at the top of their district standings coming the end of the year. Meadow lost to Borden County last week. Of course, Borden County is probably the number 1 team in the state in 6-man football, and so Meadow's looking to get on the right track against Petersburg, and then you got Ropesville taking on Nazareth, a couple of really good 6-man teams as well. So, there's some really good games going on, but I tell you what, of the ones that I'm looking at, when I say these are the games I'd really, really like to be at, I'd like to go over to Lubbock Cooper and watch Randall and Cooper play, and probably my game, just because of all the storylines and the intriguing manner of the game, is that shallow water level land game. It really is interesting to me.
And that one's in shallow water, right?
And it is in shallow water.
All right. Stephen Orr, West Texas Friday Night Scoreboard Show. Appreciate your time, and just a reminder for folks, when you're driving around tonight or tuning in at home, you can listen to the West Texas Friday Night Scoreboard Show here on KFYO right after our ball game, or right about 10 o'clock to midnight. Same thing on our sister station, 1340 The Fan, and then throughout West Texas, 10 p.m. to midnight as well. Stephen, thank you for your time.
Chad, as always, thank you. Enjoyed it.
All right, we'll visit with you next week.
You bet.
Thanks, Stephen.